Hi, Charles County. Welcome back to another episode of Let's Get Fiscal, a chance to talk about all things related to finance and budgeting here in Charles County. As always, joining us is Fiscal and Admin Services, Jake Dyer. Jake, thanks for being here.
Happy to be here.
And we have a special guest today, Danielle Mitchell from our county attorney's office.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You are so welcome, Danielle. I'm laughing that you said thanks for having me because we did just discuss that this is not, that being on camera is not your favorite brand of strawberry jam. Is that accurate?
I think that's fair.
Okay. But you do a beautiful job with it, which is why we keep asking you to do stuff like this.
I appreciate that.
I'm sorry you don't like it. I appreciate that you're willing to do it and you are good at it.
Thank you.
And I just want to say about Danielle, when she comes and presents at Citizens Academy, Danielle always gives the most spectacular breakdowns of complex information. So the problem is, Danielle, you're good at your job, and that's why you keep getting asked back.
That's the reward, right?
Yes, the reward is do more. Yes.
Okay, very cool.
So if you do a really bad job on today's episode, perhaps we won't invite you back.
Mental note.
Mental note.
Thank you. Okay.
Challenge accepted. But I know you're going to do great. Danielle is here with us today because we're going to talk about legislation in Charles County at the local level, at the state level. And Danielle's going to give an overview of what the legislative processes here are in the county, but we have a lot of other great content out there on video and podcast. So we'll link to that. We don't want to do too much on that. What we really want to talk about is the financial impact of that legislation so that before our commissioners, before our delegates say yes, no, maybe so to enacting change in Charles County, what is it actually going to cost?
Correct.
So Danielle, can you start, please? And I promise I won't put you on the spot too much, but just overall, legislation, county attorney's office, Charles County commissioners, Charles County government, what does all of that mean?
Right. So our Board of Commissioners have created a standard operating procedure that pretty much guides our office in terms of what that legislative process should look like. And so there really shouldn't be a lot of deviation year over year, but essentially it starts in the spring with our local legislative process, where we essentially put out a public notice asking individuals in our community if they have different legislative proposals, things that they would like to see changed in our Charles County code, additions, deletions, changes. And so that process starts around April. The commissioners will consider those proposals. And again, those are specific to the Charles County code. So that does not implicate the state process.
It's only it is something that would happen right within our county lines, nowhere else.
Right. And our Board of Commissioners have the discretion as the legislative body for Charles County to pass laws.
Okay.
So when you think about the three branches of government, we are unique in that our Board of Commissioners is really serving as two branches, right? Executive and legislative.
Okay.
So they have the ability to make changes to their county code, and they want ideas from members of the public each spring for them to consider. As a part of that process, and with respect to the fiscal side of it, any proposal that has a fiscal impact, a potential fiscal impact, something that's going to cost us money, we need to better understand what that impact is before the commissioners can make a final decision whether or not to implement that legislation.
Which makes perfect sense. We don't want to make a decision without knowing what it would cost. That's just good business, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So there's a lot of really great ideas, and some of them are simply cost prohibitive, right? So at the end of the day, they have to have that information. They want to have decision-making that is data-driven. And so that is where I believe Jake's crew comes in and provides those fiscal notes so that the commissioners are informed before they make a decision about what legislation will move forward in the process.
Okay, so let's just take local for a minute. So local legislation comes in through your office. It can be through a group. It can be through a person. I want to see this changed in our Charles County governance, okay?
Right.
Jake, you then get looped in.
Correct.
And how do you know how to determine a cost on that? What happens?
Yeah, so we'll take the information, we'll read the legislation, and we'll kind of go through it, and we'll work with Danielle because she might have some good information on as well. And then we try to determine what part of county government is impacted by that legislation, and then we'll farm it out. So if we think it's impacting the sheriff's office, we'll send it to the sheriff's office, or it's planning growth management. So we take their feedback on what it could impact them. And once they say we think it's going to do, maybe you need this position or that position or this type of operating costs and so forth, we'll take that information together, put some estimates together on that cost, and then put it in a package that we would then submit it to Danielle, who then would then bring it to the commissioners as part of that legislative discussion. She would show that the fiscal impact of this one.
And then it's up to the commissioners to say, we think that's a worthwhile
Right.
investment change,
Right.
or no, thank you, that's too much.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So in terms of the state process, so again, we have a similar process in terms of seeking out proposals from members of the public. So each summer, we will again run public notices, different advertisements, engage with your office, with media in terms of spreading the word to individuals in our community about changes that they would like to see to the state code. So this is an area that's a little tricky because it is not within the commissioner's authority to make changes to the Maryland code.
Right.
It is the General Assembly's job to make changes to the Maryland code, and that is comprised of representatives from the entire state. But what our commissioners will do is seek those proposals and then hear from members of the public at a public hearing in the fall. We invite our delegation, which are our Charles County representatives, to the General Assembly. We have delegates and we have senators. They all meet, hold that public hearing so that they can hear directly from those that are interested in making proposals. Ultimately, the commissioners will decide to create a package of requests. And those requests will go to the delegation, and then it becomes the delegation's responsibility and decision-making authority whether or not to move those things through the General Assembly process.
And at that point, do you guys consider the fiscal impact at that point? Even though it's state level, do you look at the fiscal impact for the county?
So there's a number of different things going on, and I would say Jake's, and he can speak to this directly, but he is involved in a whole myriad of ways with what's going on with the General Assembly. So I would say with respect to our package, yes, there is some consideration to the fiscal impact of those proposals. And so similar to the local process, we would ask for that information from Fiscal and Administrative Services before the commissioners decide to finalize their legislative package. But beyond that, Jake's office is really looking at a number of statewide bills and their fiscal impact on local governments.
So before we jump to that, because you had said you have things coming into your office that Danielle might not even need to see.
Correct.
I'm curious, and I just said I wasn't going to put you guys on the spot, and I clearly lied. Can you give an example of either a state or a local legislation that's come up that there was a fiscal impact and kind of what it looked like and how you worked through it, and did it pass, did it not?
There's times where we would, that involves the state first, because a lot of times you have to have the state approval to enable legislation.
Okay.
Then you can create it at the county level. And one of those would be a tax credit to a specialized area of the county. So one example would be a couple years ago was a tax credit for our volunteers. So
EMS and fire volunteers.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So that tax credit first had to get state legislation approval first. So that process would have started with Danielle in the summertime. It would have gone through a public hearing where they would have heard that. At that time, since it was only related to Charles County only, there could have been a request at that time for us to provide a fiscal note. But there's other ones, if it's impacting the entire county, we typically don't get those requests. But then once it goes to the state will then, through their Department of Legislative Services, because they see it's Charles County only, they'll come to us. But they also will come to us on a variety of statewide legislative matters and ask us to provide fiscal notes on them.
To know what the impact was, if we change this for the whole state of Maryland, what would that look like for Charles County?
Correct.
Excellent.
So once the state, for this particular reason, once the state allowed the enabling legislation, then Danielle works again to get that worked added into our county code, and then we would definitely be providing a fiscal note for our county commissioners to make.
So they could see that impact.
Yes.
So that's a good point. Sometimes you don't really, if you don't know if your enabling legislation will be successful, then there's really no point in doing a deep dive, because ultimately what enabling legislation is giving you permission. It's not a mandate. And so it's possible that we can seek enabling legislation for something like a tax credit and then make a determination once that enabling legislation was approved that this is not the year for this, that maybe this is not fiscally responsible at this time. And so we're not required to do that local law that would take advantage basically of the enabling legislation. And so we're not necessarily, I would say, seeking out all the very fine details about those kinds of pieces of legislation because we're going to do that work when the time comes to do the local law.
It sounds like as much as the timeline is in place, as much as this is a process, that there is also a lot of back and forth and fluid so that you're not investing a lot of staff time, a lot of resources into something that might not come to fruition.
Correct.
Anyway, which makes me feel good. Like, let's not spend time and money on something that we might not need to spend time and money on.
Yeah.
Correct.
So, Jake, you had mentioned when we were discussing this that there are times that you get a lot of legislative stuff coming into your office that doesn't even really require the county attorney's eyes.
Correct. So once the Maryland General Assembly begins, which is usually the beginning of January, the bills are being submitted for General Assembly consideration, either at the House level or the Senate level. That information funnels to the Department of Legislative Services, and what they will do is they would send an email to us. They don't send it to every single county because if not, we would be reviewing over 1,000 bills. Wow. They take a handful of bills and farm them out to different counties for their feedback on the fiscal impact of this bill. We sometimes get 7 to 10 a day where we are asked to speak to the fiscal impact, and we have 7 calendar days to respond. So they don't take in consideration holidays or anything. You have 7 days. So if you get it on, and then there's no consideration for weather events or anything.
Right.
It's where we have 7 days to respond. So and that requires coordination where when we receive it, we quickly have to reach out to the subject matters like we do at the local level to what the fiscal impact would be. And we have a really tight deadline and we get it back. We have a standardized spreadsheet that the state asks us to fill out, and we have 7 days to submit it. And
similar to what Danielle was talking about earlier of, making sure it's the right investment of information at the time, it sounds like they're looking for quick, that the state is looking, don't take deep dives, get us, just tell us what it would look like in your county, we'll compare it to others. Is that accurate?
Yeah, right.
And Danielle, you looked like you were going to say something.
No, and I was going to add that I think what Jake's staff does, it's really critically important because the General Assembly needs to understand what that local impact is. And so even if we're not doing a deep dive, if we have concerns about that fiscal impact, especially things that are mandated.
This is the chance to do it.
This is the chance to do it because that's going to be a part of their consideration as to whether or not to ultimately support a bill.
And I speak to the facts. I speak to the fiscal impact of it. We try to get out any type of, any reasons why not to do it. We just say
this isn't pro or con.
Right.
This is it would cost.
Correct.
Okay. I think that's an interesting component, and I assume that it is challenging at times. Jake, you and I have been doing this for I think a year now, and I know how much you care about careful spending in Charles County. I assume it's hard to not put the con or the pro in there and to just say like, this is the money, this is the money. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, it's speaking to the facts.
Okay.
'Cause that's what they want to know. They want you to speak to the facts. So, and then what Department of Legislative will do is for every bill, so you can go on Maryland General's website and you could see every bill that's been submitted. There's always a separate document called a fiscal and policy impact. And they'll provide information they get from Charles County or all the other counties to speak to what the state impact of proposed legislation would be, but also on the local level. And if it's impacting any type of businesses, they would also speak to that.
That makes sense. And randomized groupings, as in, are we usually grouped in the Tri-County area? Is it just based on your size? Is it just a blink, blink, blink? What do you think?
I think it's just a random selection.
Okay.
But obviously, if they know it's a Charles County specific bill, it's going to come to Charles County.
Which makes sense. That's a good thing.
Yes.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
It's so interesting that, when you start to peel back all these layers where it sounds like it's so easy, like a resident could just put in, I think this is an important change to have in Charles County, but it's not that easy because even if it's the world's most amazing, important idea, if we can't afford it, we can't afford it. And at the state level, it might be great for a county over here, but for Charles County, it would have a different impact. So I imagine, a lot to unpack of what this would really look like when we get these. What would it look like? What would it cost? And how does Charles County best navigate that process? Yeah.
Correct.
What are some of the things that you've, because Jake, you've been with county government for
22 years.
And Danielle, you've been with county government
10 and a half.
Yeah.
What's an interesting thing that you've figured out in that time when looking through the legislation and the fiscal impacts for it?
I will say each year it doesn't get easier.
More bills, I feel like. In my time here, it's been more and more and more. And so it's still 90 days, right? There's a 90-day session.
But so much more shoved in.
But there's so much more volume. I think it makes it really challenging for everyone at every level because I mean, you want to be able to do as good of a job as you can. I know Jake does, and I know I try to as well, but things are moving very quickly.
Yes.
So that can be a challenge.
Yeah, it's a challenge because it's also peak budget season for us. So January can be a lot for the budget office staff because they're going through these House bills as well as working with our departments and partner agencies on their budget needs. So it can be a very high volume time for everybody.
And a time with a fair number of holidays, possible inclement weather, like you said, where like the calendar does not slow down, we move forward.
Correct.
Excellent. Well, this is one of those times where I just want to say how grateful I am that you do the work you do in the county because I love community engagement and I don't love fiscal impacts. So thank you for doing what you do so that I can do what I do and our residents can have the best services by people who are really good at their jobs. Means a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danielle, for being here. I promise that we will invite you for more.
Or not.
It's whatever I'm sorry. It's just when you're good at something, it's just, we're going to keep inviting you. You explain things really well, and we appreciate it. So Danielle Mitchell from our county attorney's office, and as always, Jake Dyer from Fiscal and Admin Services. And Jake, thank you for bringing all things fiscal to Charles County so that people understand it and can access it and then know. I know we referenced a lot of things about legislative proposals and the legislative process. We do have some other great media content on that, so we'll make sure we put that in the show notes. And if you have other questions about fiscal impact or you want to go back and look, check out our other episodes and get really involved in the budget process. It is that time of year, so be looking for ways that you can give feedback on our Stay Engaged Charles County platform, and of course, public hearings coming up later in the spring. Thanks so much for tuning in, Charles County. As always, take care, stay safe, and stay engaged.
Thanks for listening. If you like this podcast and want to hear more, search Charles County Government on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. And be sure to like and subscribe. We're also available on YouTube. Search Charles County Commissioners. And stay connected for all county news, information, and programs by visiting www.charlescountymd.gov/stay connected.